Have you ever heard of adults who care for dolls as if they were real babies? They have names, clothes, diapers, even birth certificates. But what could be behind this such unusual behavior? It's not about fashion, not about fantasy. This phenomenon has deeper roots than you might imagine. And when we look at it through Carl Jung's psychological lens, everything takes on a whole new dimension. What do these dolls symbolize? And what does this care reveal about modern human beings? Maybe in the end, reborn dolls say less about them and more about us. Today's video will take you down a path you never would have expected. The question nobody expects. There are people caring for dolls like they're their children. And no, we're not talking about kids playing house. These are adults, women, men, young and old, who change diapers, rock them in their arms, and even prepare bottles, all for hyper-realistic dolls called reborn babies. The scene seems strange at first glance, but it raises an inevitable question. What's really going on behind this unusual choice? It's not just about a doll. It's about something that pulses deep down, silent, but powerful. The real question might not be, why do they care for dolls? But rather, what are they trying to heal? When someone connects so intensely with something inanimate, it's a sign that there's more at stake than simple affection. It's as if these people are telling, without words, a story that got stuck in time, a loss that nobody saw, a void that was never named. And what if deep down, this practice is revealing something that many prefer to hide? What's curious is that when we observe this, we feel a pang of discomfort, a mixture of judgment and confusion. After all, what adult in their right mind would treat a doll like it's a real baby? But this question, the one nobody expects, is just the beginning. What if what seems strange is actually symbolic? What if there's an emotional logic behind this that few are willing to see? Hold on, the answer is closer than you think. It's not crazy. It's symbolic. Before making any hasty judgments, we need to change the lens through which we look at this phenomenon. Caring for reborn babies might seem like an infantilized fantasy, but for many people, it's a profound symbolic manifestation. Carl Jung's analytical psychology helps us understand that the human mind expresses itself through symbols, and this goes far beyond what the eyes can see. The doll, in this case, isn't just a doll. It represents something that consciousness hasn't been able to name yet, but that the unconscious screams silently. These emotional bonds with objects are often ways of translating pain that common language can't reach. When someone changes a doll's diaper or rocks a silicone body in their arms, they might be trying to fill an absence that words could never explain. Unresolved grief, childhood trauma, an interrupted dream of motherhood, all of this can be projected onto that object. It's as if, unconsciously, the person is saying, "I still feel," even if nobody sees. And here's the central point. It's not crazy. It's symbolic. It's a language of the unconscious, an archetypal way of expressing what's still being digested inside. Jung said that everything that doesn't come to consciousness returns as fate. And perhaps this so misunderstood behavior is an attempt, however timid, to dialogue with a forgotten part of oneself. But this symbolic conversation has an even more powerful function, which will gradually reveal itself. The function of the symbol. The human mind is ingenious when it needs to survive pain. When a loss is too great to be understood, or when the void is too deep to be named, the unconscious builds a bridge. That bridge is the symbol. And the reborn baby, for those who adopt it with affection and care, can be exactly that, a bridge, a way to continue loving where there was once only silence. Jung explained that symbols emerge when the conscious mind can no longer handle what it feels. So the unconscious takes the reins and creates images that speak without saying. Think of this as a reflection of something very intimate. The woman who could never get pregnant and adopts a reborn isn't playing. She's, perhaps without realizing it, symbolizing the child who never came. The man who lost his sister in childhood and starts caring for a doll might be unconsciously reliving an interrupted affection. These symbols aren't random, but loaded with meanings that escape rational logic. That's why those observing from outside usually don't understand, but those who feel it understand, even without words. The symbol, in this case, isn't the end of the line. It's the beginning of a process of resignification. And what's most interesting is that it only appears when there's something very important that needs to be cared for. Jung said that symbols are windows to the unconscious, and when we look through them, we see what we try to hide from ourselves. But what if this doll represents not just something lost, but a part of one's own identity that was left behind? Maybe that's what the symbol is trying to show us. The mother archetype. There's a pattern that lives within all of us, men and women, and manifests in unexpected ways, the mother archetype. We're not just talking about the woman who gives birth, but the energy that cares, that welcomes, that protects. It's that instinct to wrap the other in our arms, to nurture, to watch over fragility. When someone cares for a reborn baby with such dedication, they might be unconsciously activating this archetype. And the most fascinating detail? Sometimes it's not the other who needs to be cared for, it's the person themselves. The mother archetype also turns inward. Often those who care for the reborn are actually caring for themselves, for an internal part that was forgotten, neglected, lonely. It's as if that lap offered to the doll is, in fact, a symbolic lap for their own pain. And mind you, this impulse isn't something to be ridiculed. It carries an ancestral, primitive wisdom that seeks to restore emotional balance. After all, who hasn't needed to be cared for, even after becoming an adult? This symbolic expression of the archetype can reveal an emotional force that's trying to emerge. And when this happens, the external behavior might seem strange, but the internal motivation is legitimate. The gesture of dressing a doll, putting a bow in its hair, or warming a little blanket is, in essence, a gesture of love. But is this love being projected only onto the doll? Or is there something deeper happening? The answer might lie in another, even more intimate territory: inner child and reparation. Inside every adult lives a child, a part of us that didn't grow with the body, that still fears the dark, that wants to be held when the world weighs heavy, that cries silently when not understood. Jung called this the inner child, a symbolic entity that carries our fragilities, unrealized desires, and emotional wounds from childhood. And here's a point that few people notice. By adopting a reborn baby, many adults are actually trying to care for this forgotten child within themselves, a care they may have never received. The inner child doesn't knock on the door asking for attention. It manifests in subtle behaviors, sometimes even incomprehensible ones. People who desperately seek affection, who sabotage relationships, who feel empty, even with everything in place. It's as if they're trying to heal something old, without knowing exactly what. The reborn, in this scenario, isn't just an object. It's a symbolic mirror of this wounded child. The person changes the doll's diaper, but deep down they're saying, "Now I take care of myself." This is deeper than it seems. And this type of emotional reparation can be a fundamental step toward healing. Books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle or The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk show how past experiences shape our psyche. When someone starts caring for a reborn with such zeal, they might be intuitively trying to rescue a lost piece of their own soul. But this reunion with the inner child also provokes something uncomfortable, both in those who live it and in those who observe from the outside. The shadow and others' discomfort. The human mind has an old and sneaky trick, projecting onto others what it doesn't want to see in itself. Jung called this the shadow, everything we repress, deny, or ignore within ourselves. When someone sees an adult caring for a doll as if it were a real baby and feels discomfort, contempt, or even anger, the problem is rarely with the other person. It's within themselves. That discomfort is often a reflection of their own shadow, poking from inside, "Look at me too." It's easier to laugh than to face it. It's simpler to point fingers than to ask, "Why does this affect me so much?" The reborn, in this sense, becomes an involuntary catalyst for internal discomfort. The woman who cares for the doll with love might be at peace, while the observer feels secondhand embarrassment. But why? Perhaps because that emotional surrender mirrors a side of us that was repressed, an affection that wasn't lived, an ignored need, a pain that never found space. Judgment in this case is just a disguise for one's own denial. And here's the irony. What we criticize most forcefully is usually exactly what we need to look at more closely in ourselves. The reborn bothers not because of what it is, but because of what it awakens. And if the simple act of caring for a doll exposes something so deep in those watching from outside, imagine what can still emerge from this symbol for those inside the experience. But there's a factor that makes everything even more complex and lonelier: the fear of social judgment. The fear of social judgment. The fear of being judged is a silent prison. How many times do we stop ourselves from doing something simple, like wearing a different outfit, expressing a feeling, or even smiling spontaneously, just because we fear others' gaze? Imagine then what someone feels who finds emotional relief in caring for a reborn baby and needs to hide it from the world. These people aren't asking for approval, nor claiming their dolls should have rights. Most of the time, they just want peace, a corner of the world where they can exist without being targets of sideways glances. It's curious how society has difficulty dealing with what it doesn't understand. The woman who wakes up at dawn to feed a reborn might seem to some eccentric, but nobody asks what's behind that gesture. Could it be loneliness, grief, or just a legitimate way of dealing with life? Judgment happens because society prefers to label rather than understand. And what's cruelest is that often judgment doesn't even need to be spoken aloud. It comes in a look, a muffled laugh, a whispered comment. But this type of gaze says more about those who judge than about those being judged. When we see someone seeking comfort in something symbolic, the most human thing would be to respect it, but the most common thing is to mock. And so those who live this experience become silent, isolate themselves, protect themselves. But this silence, however protective it may seem, can have a high emotional price, because pain that isn't expressed accumulates, and in certain cases, the symbol that relieves can also become an escape. And that's exactly where the line between healing and prison begins to blur. Therapy or escape. There's a fine line, almost invisible, between finding relief and hiding from pain. Jung said that symbols are bridges, not destinations. They serve to guide us to what needs to be transformed, but if we cling too tightly to them, we risk getting lost. The reborn baby can start as a healing tool, a symbolic gesture of love and care. But if it becomes a fixed anchor, a permanent substitute for reality, it can trap more than liberate. And this happens more than one might imagine. Have you heard of people who can no longer leave home without the reborn in their arms? Who create rigid routines around the object, canceling contact with the real world? In these cases, the symbol stopped being a channel of expression and became an emotional prison. The affection projected onto the doll doesn't return inward. It stays trapped there in that simulacrum of a relationship. And the pain, instead of being transformed, is frozen. When Jung spoke about the danger of fixating on the symbol, he was warning exactly about this type of emotional trap. But we're not here to condemn anyone. The truth is that we all create substitutes. Some drown themselves in work, others in games, still others in social media. The reborn is just a visible example of something we all do: run from what hurts. The question that needs to start forming in the mind of those who observe or live this is, am I using this symbol to heal myself or to avoid feeling? And the answer to this question can open doors to an even deeper and more necessary process: the importance of integration. True transformation begins when we stop running and start listening. Jung said that symbols are like dreams. They don't serve to be lived forever, but to be deciphered. The reborn baby, in this case, can be a messenger. It points to something that was forgotten, repressed, or lost. But the big step comes when the person realizes what this doll represents and starts working on that within themselves. This is the moment when the symbol stops being just an object and becomes a key. It's like when someone spends years keeping a loved one's clothes. At first it's comfort, later it can become attachment. But if the person at some point looks at that and understands, this represents the love I lived, and now I can move forward, the cycle closes. With reborns, it's similar. Integrating is this: recognizing what's being projected and using this insight to heal what's real. It's the moment when the person can continue caring for the doll, but now with awareness, no longer out of unconscious necessity. And this integration process isn't something that happens overnight. It involves looking inward, talking with one's own pain, accepting that not everything will have immediate answers. It might involve therapy, meditation, writing, art, or even talking with other people who live similar experiences. When the person starts asking, "What does this say about me?" instead of, "What will others think?" the symbol fulfills its mission. But what happens when this symbolic experience starts leaving the silent bedrooms and hits the internet showcases? The phenomenon in the digital age, with the internet, everything got a stage, including what was once intimate, discreet, almost secret. The reborn baby phenomenon exploded on social media, revealing a universe that many didn't even know existed. From videos showing care routines to entire profiles dedicated to these babies, the digital world laid bare the symbolic. But along with visibility came shallow judgment. Likes and comments don't filter empathy, they just reinforce the spectacle. And then the symbol became content, and content became controversy. When something symbolic becomes entertainment, it risks losing its depth. People watch videos of adults caring for reborns and find it bizarre, funny, or even sad. But few stop to ask, what does this behavior reveal about our time? Are we so starved for connection that any attempt to fill the void, however unusual, becomes a headline? The internet doesn't judge with depth, it judges with speed. And this prevents many from seeing the human side of this story. What's curious is that by mocking or being shocked, the audience often reveals the same void they criticize. The difference is that some seek symbols to deal with it, and others just project. In this digital showcase, the reborn became a mirror of a society that feels too much but understands too little. And what's most intriguing is realizing that the phenomenon didn't grow randomly. It touched something collective, something that everyone, to some extent, shares. And this brings us to an even broader question. What's missing in our human connections? Humans starved for connection. We live surrounded by people, but deeply alone, in buildings, on transportation, on social media. Everything brings us physically closer, but little connects us emotionally. People look into each other's eyes less, talk without listening, live on autopilot. And in this scenario of superficial relationships, any gesture that brings an illusion of care can become essential. The reborn baby enters here as a symbol of stable affection in an unstable world. It doesn't judge, doesn't abandon, doesn't respond with coldness. It's predictable, and for many people that's already enormous relief. Maybe what's scariest isn't seeing someone caring for a doll. What's scariest is realizing how much more common this is than it seems, just in other forms. There are people who talk to plants, sleep-hugging pillows, keep diaries as if talking to someone. All of these are ways of creating symbolic connections with what's missing. The difference is that the reborn is too visible. It lays bare what many prefer to hide, and that's why it causes discomfort. But it also reveals an urgent truth. We're all starved for connection. And this need isn't a sign of weakness. It's a response to the excess of emotional distancing that surrounds us. It's not about craziness, nor about being childish. It's about the search for affection in a world that teaches us to be tough. Reborn babies, in this context, aren't the problem. They're the symptom, a reflection of our difficulty in creating real bonds, and perhaps a silent invitation to look with more empathy at those beside us and within ourselves. Because deep down, we're all projecting something. And you, what do you project? In the end, the reborn baby might just be a mirror, a reflection of what's missing, what was lost, or what never came to exist. The most powerful question here isn't, why would someone do this? But rather, and me, what have I been doing to fill my voids? We project all the time onto people, relationships, objects. The reborn just makes this projection visible. But we all have our own reborns. It could be an addiction, an unlived dream, or even a routine that no longer makes sense, but that we maintain out of fear of facing what's behind it. And this question shouldn't cause guilt. It should provoke reflection. Maybe you're projecting the need to be accepted onto a worn-out relationship, or putting all your identity into a job that exhausts you, or distracting yourself with information overload just so you don't have to deal with silence. The difference is that, in the case of the reborn, the projection is more concrete, tangible, easy to point out. But that doesn't make it stranger than the others, just braver perhaps, because it shows, without disguises, what many try to hide. So before judging someone who adopts a reborn, maybe it's worth asking yourself, what have I been using to fill my emotional holes? What symbols trap me? Which ones do I need to transform? This journey isn't about dolls, it's about awareness. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you also wants to understand more. Not just about others, but about yourself. Because in the end, the most powerful symbol is the one that shows you who you are and who you can still become. Now that you've seen all of this, the question that won't go away is, and you, what do you project? Because understanding what's behind caring for a reborn baby is just the beginning. What's most important is looking inward. Could it be that you've also been using symbols, distractions, or addictions to avoid facing what you feel? What in your life has served as emotional anesthesia disguised as routine? This video isn't about dolls, it's about awareness, about integrating what's missing and healing what hurts. And if this stirred something in you, it's because there's something in there wanting to transform. Don't ignore that voice. Allow yourself to investigate your emotions, patterns, and choices more deeply. Ask uncomfortable questions. Reflect with depth. And if you want to go further, start with small actions: therapy, a journal, a book. How about starting with Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, or The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron? Sometimes the next step is in the silence we've been avoiding. If this content made you think differently, if it touched some forgotten part inside you, subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell, because there's so much more we need to explore together. And if you want to continue this journey, click on the video that is showing up here on the side. It'll show you other layers of the human mind that almost nobody talks about. See you there.